What's the most terrifying mythical creatures do you think exist? Story 1. The Mongolian death worm. Though still considered a cryptid, consistent and repeated sightings of the worm have long been reported in Mongolia. The vastness of the Gobi Desert, political destabilization in the region, and the difficulty of searching for the worm in isolated and hostile terrain has impeded its discovery. But the scientific community is still on the lookout, though not without a certain amount of amusement. Story 2. Kraken, actually giant squid, are real, so Kraken might have been real. Squids over 10 meters long have been found. Sperm whales commonly have scars from fights with squids. It's obvious that the Kraken legend has a basis in reality. So far, there are no confirmed cases of a squid large enough to cause damage to a ship, but I wouldn't say it's impossible. Well, I remember a friend telling me he read something that said that maybe the people who thought they saw the Kraken actually saw a giant squid. It's a bit far-fetched, but surprisingly believable. I mean, it's an old myth, and it just kind of seems like the monster that would be able to tackle a ship. Story 3. Sea monsters. Large creatures swimming in our oceans that no one has seen yet. There's plenty of unexplored areas and oceans around the world that are capable of harboring life of all sorts. And it wouldn't surprise me if we found other kinds of large animals down there that would make our hair stand on end. I also think that Bigfoot might be real, insofar as it could be a previously unknown species of bear or other large mammal. I have always loved the Sasquatch legend, and generally watch any program about them that comes on, except Finding Bigfoot, F them. While I do not think it is terribly likely, it is entirely possible that there is an unknown species of primate. I will not say ape, because it does not have to be an ape, living in the remote regions of the world. I do think that we would have found a corpse or some kind of hard evidence by now, but life has taught me never to rule out any possibility. Story 4. I used to work with elephants, and I remember someone once telling me that their skulls were probably what inspired Cyclops myths. Sounds far-fetched when you think about what they look like normally, but without all the soft tissue. Their eye sockets are discreetly tucked away on the sides of the head, and the nasal cavity makes a big old hole in the front of their face that looks a lot like where one giant eye could have been. Story 5. I know it isn't a mythical creature because they were still alive around 100 years ago, but I believe that the thylacine still exists. It's thought to be extinct, with the last of the species dying in captivity in the early 1900s, but there have been growing reports in Australia within the last few years from eyewitnesses claiming to have seen them. Seems very, very plausible. Story 6. Vampires. Actually, people suffering from a rare type blood disease called porphyria. Sea monsters. Old texts from Muslim travelers or Vikings contain descriptions of giant forked tongues coming from beneath the ocean and splashing down, whale tails, and giant squid locked in battles with sperm whales. Both exist. Dragons. One of the few mythological animals described in every continent. Easily could have been remnants of dinosaurs not extinct yet, or even species of smaller descendants that eventually died off. Demons. Do enough hallucinogens, and you'll see them too. The belief in vampires also comes from people misunderstanding how corpses decompose. The belief in vampires came from ladies in 1100s Eastern Europe needing an excuse for how they got pregnant after their husbands had died. They would say he had come back from the dead to do the deed. A key vampire root word, upir, was initially a catch-all word for anything that endangered society. Broken oxen yokes and even spoiled watermelons or pumpkins could be dubbed upire. The original image of the vampire was a gross, red-tinged, ruddy-faced man because it was modeled after a drunkard, not a corpse. False beliefs about decomposition served to reinforce these scapegoat claims, and in that, they aided in the origin of the vampire. Many things stemming from the social mechanism of demonizing traits harmful to a society lead to the vampire myth. Source: Paul Barber, Vampires, Burial, and Death. Folklore and Reality, and the Slave 3301 course. Story 7. I really wouldn't be surprised if Sasquatch turned out to be real. I mean, they've got countless kilometers of forest to run around in, and we already know that such forests can support large mammals like bears and so on. That being said, I'm really skeptical when presented with video evidence and documentaries about the thing. It'd be much better for a reputable wildlife tracker to look for it than a team of cryptozoologists who crash through the forest with a 30-man camera crew and then wonder why they don't see any animals. I agree, but anyone who would take that task would, unfortunately, immediately and forever be met with ridicule by the scientific community, unless, of course, they actually found proof positive. Story 8. I'm pretty sure that there's a Bigfoot species somewhere. Too many consistent stories from all around the world. For that same reason, I think it's possible Atlantis was a real place with people. Fingerprints of the Gods is an interesting read on the subject matter. Edit. As I seem to be getting a good bit of flack for the part about Atlantis, I'm going to clarify this as best as possible. Okay, this is going to sound a bit far fetched and a bit crazy, but this is what I genuinely believe. It is my belief that at some point in our collective past, many thousands of years ago, there was a civilization that inhabited the earth, whether a more evolved or advanced group, humans, aliens, people from another dimension, or some other possibility not yet known to science. But what matters is this group of beings had a hand in shaping the events of human history. They were our gods and guides. They are the reason why ancient cultures around the world share shocking similar stories and gods. As there is no scientific proof of them actually existing, at least shared with the general population of the world, I think of their home as the island of Atlantis that disappeared beneath the sea, Story 9. The only one I absolutely believe in is Sasquatch. I was a major skeptic until I had what I believe to be several experiences with one or more of them over the course of a few days. I'm fairly open minded about cryptozoology. Just because something hasn't been found yet obviously doesn't mean it doesn't exist. That said, in a place like North America, I find it incredibly unlikely that there's a species of wild great ape that somehow escaped mainstream science. By now, we've cleared and settled enough of the continent that we should have found either living examples or the remains of dead examples. The remaining thing is the biggest issue for me. You can't tell me that a breeding population of great apes, extant for thousands of years and spanning a continent, if sightings are to be believed, wouldn't have left mortal remains behind for us to have found by now. That's hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of bodies just disappearing forever. The areas where we build towns and cities today would have been their habitat in the past. You're telling me that somehow, despite having found all sorts of extinct and far older mammals in these same places as we've built, we've managed to completely miss the bones of a creature that should, to the untrained eye, appear human. Story 10. On the opposite side of this, I believe that narwhals were either mythical or extinct. I'd only seen drawn or cartoon pictures of them my entire life, and they just seem so magical. I mean, come on, it's like the unicorn of Wales. Only a few years ago did I see a video of a real live one, and my entire world was shaken. Also, I realized how relevant my username is to this, but I genuinely thought narwhals were made up. Story 11. Sea monsters. I'm definitely a believer in the possibility that in the vastness of the ocean, some prehistoric, long assumed dead, or never before seen creatures exist. Case in point, I'm 12 years old taking the jet ski out for the first time at Lake Havasu near Laughlin, Nevada, when my jet ski stalls near a cove and out of view of the cove that my family was lounging at. As I'm trying to restart the engine, out of the water in front of me emerges a giant, thick trunk of a neck, with a head at the top that resembles the head of a camel. The thing is covered in what looks like seaweed, making its distinctive features difficult to discern. That is, I don't remember noticing any eyes. And its movements could not have been more fluid. I always describe the way it came out of the water as such. Imagine pushing a buoy under the water and seeing it pop out vertically. There was not a splash from the disruption of the water. Barely even a ripple was made. The whole thing lasted 5 seconds max. It seemed to look at me and immediately returned to the water in the same manner that it emerged, once again leaving hardly a ripple in the water. At that point, I remember being overcome with disgust at the fact that my legs were still floating in the water, as is the case with jet skis. I immediately tried to start the engine again. Thankfully, it turned on and I got the hell out of there. Went back to camp. No one believed me. Story 12. I think it's not impossible that unicorns, phoenixes, or dragons could have existed. I mean, a unicorn is just a horned horse. So as far as we know, there are deer with horns and goats with horns. Why is a horse with a horn so unreasonable? As for dragons, if there were any large lizards or dinosaur descendants, they probably would have been hunted to extinction, as they would have been rare. Interesting that they would live in caves or underwater. As for any dinosaur species to survive, that would be their best bet. They were probably not as depicted now, though. In the case of phoenixes, I would doubt that there would be a creature that reproduces by self ignition, but it's not such an outlandish concept that it's impossible. There could have been a bird that perhaps chose areas where fires occurred to nest. And as others have said, the Kraken's existence seems plausible. With regards to Bigfoot, that's an interesting case. Could it be a giant ground sloth? We know those once existed. There is a noticeable lack of apes or simians in North America. If they do exist, they're damn good at hiding from us. Now, mermaids and weird crap like sphinxes or manticores, just silly combinations of other animals. Story 13. Kraken. Maybe Leviathan too. Jersey Devil. Mothman. Ghosts. Zombies. Aliens. And I would like to say either Loch Ness or Champ from Lake Champlain. But they just look so similar. Too similar, really. Some of these aren't creatures, but the police. Originally, zombies were supposedly from voodoo stuff, where they were being possessed by a witch or whatever. So I might believe that, but not the modern zombies that they are made out to be like now. I would like to believe reptilians, but it's just one of the myths that is just too bizarre, and just one of the fake IDs that got popular. Story 14, American Southwest Thunderbird. Modern science has accepted into the taxonomic record the Haast eagle of New Zealand. Google it. I will not ruin any of the terror and relief these creatures are dead, which would more than account for the presence of these creatures in other parts of the world, like America. Also proves a lot of oral history of the American Indians, like the Apache nations and Pueblo people. Story 15. I think that humanoid links between humans and animals is a real possibility. Obviously, we hear about Bigfoot all the time, but people also report seeing werewolves in the western Great Lakes area, as well as the Mothman and Jersey Devil in the New England region. Even in the deep south, people have made reports of a lizard man in the swamps. It creeps me out to think about it, but at the same time, it is incredibly intriguing. Story 16. Lots of deep sea ones, so I'm going for a land animal. The Beast of Bodmin. It's supposed to be some sort of panther-like cat that roams around Cornwall in the UK. It freaks people out because there are no big cats in the UK. I think it's real because it could very easily be an escaped zoo animal or someone's illegally imported pet that they didn't want anymore. Story 17. Mammoths were still around when we were building pyramids, so I suspect anything is possible. Mostly, I think that we as a species were around for some time, while large beasts still had a majority of land covered. Through climate change, not like now, but like ice age, ending type crap, US being an invasive species, and other such tragedies that they died out. Though maybe some still exist in the far reaches. The oceans are still game. Story 18, Dragons. Multiple cultures have developed a version of the dragon at some time, be it the Hydra, Chinese dragon, the typical European variety, the Aboriginal rainbow serpent, and a lot more. Personally, I think that these are the explanations for finding and unearthing dinosaur fossils. And if you were to bring these bones back to your society and show them these giant creatures, surely you would develop more of a story than just, I tripped over this when I was out for a leak. Story 19, Emerald Jewel Wasp. It reproduces by stinging a cockroach and paralyzing it with its venom. As the cockroach goes mad from the venom in its brain, the wasp then bites off the end of its antennas. It then leads the half-paralyzed brain, dead cockroach along by its antenna, using it as a lead towards its burrow. Inside the burrow, it lays eggs inside the roach, then buries it alive. While in its tomb, the larvae will hatch from within the cockroach, and over a period of a week, feed off of the still alive cockroach. Finally, they will eat its organs, finishing it off, before growing up to repeat the process themselves. Story 20. Offhawkers are a German mythical creature that jumps up on the shoulders of travelers and weighs them down until they can no longer walk and are plagued by fear and doubt. It's a kind of goblin. The traveler dies most of the time. Any kind of nature spirit and fey folk as well as changelings are children that were exchanged for human ones. Any kind of lesser dragon. The Irish have some scary creatures dealing with spirits and ghosts, but I can't remember the name. We also have changelings. Up until the early 20th century in rural Ireland, it was common to see boys dressed as girls until they reached a certain age, as it was believed that changelings only wanted baby boys. This is also one of the myths that may have surrounded kids with autism or Down's syndrome. Many times, people would leave the Fae babies in a hotspot for fairy activity in hopes the Fae would take back their offspring and give the human child back. Kids that were given back but still showed odd signs that we now know as autism and Down syndrome were considered touched by the fairies, which didn't help with the outcast lifestyle they faced. A lot of children just died, though. Story 21. Gluschwanz, a creature from German folklore that resembles a winged lizard and has a tail that glows red, as if it were on fire. If a farmer underpays their farmhands, it will circle above their house at night. However, if a farmer pays their farmhand properly and treats them well, it would drop some coins down the chimney. However, despite being a winged lizard and associated with fire, it's not a dragon. If I had a nickel, and while they're not really unknown, goblins are grossly misrepresented in a ton of settings. Story 22. From Romany culture, I offer the grotesque portascoro. This abomination is an amalgamation of 4 cat heads, 4 dog heads, the body of a bird, and the tail of a snake, and it is a self-perpetuating hermaphrodite. Its children are pestilences, epidemics, and pandemics as it breeds with itself in a fetid perversion of recreation. Its parents are the king and queen to 2 rival Romany clans, and their tempestuous relationship emboldened the queen's servant to feed her a concoction of cat hair, powdered snake, and hair from the hound of hell as a contraceptive. Portascoro was the result. Edit, there's also the minchescro, which is essentially a sentient vulva amalgamated with a dung beetle. Think where the clitoris is. That's the dung beetle head, and the labia are its flesh wings. For some reason, we have a plethora of monsters born from attempted abortions or contraceptives. The same queen from the first myth that tried to sterilize herself and buried herself alive, and a dung beetle entered her womb. She birthed the Mincescro. She is the mother of, you guessed it, venereal diseases like gonorrhea and syphilis. Story 23. There's an aquatic parasite called a Cymothoa exigua. It enters fish through their gills and finds its way into their mouth, where it bites onto blood vessels on the fish's tongue and causes the tongue to die and fall off. The parasite then latches itself onto the tongue stub, where it lives permanently, feeding off the fish blood. And the fish lives the remainder of its life essentially using the Cymothoa as a creepy alien-like replacement for its tongue. Story 24. Parasitic worm that turns snails into disco zombies to attract birds. The parasite then reproduces in the bird's guts. It's called leucochloridium, and it's a parasitic worm that invades a snail's eye stalks, where it pulsates to imitate a caterpillar. In biology circles, this is known as aggressive mimicry, an organism pretending to be another to lure prey or get itself eaten. The worm then mind controls its host out into the open for hungry birds to pluck out its eyes. The worm breeds in the bird's guts, releasing its eggs in the bird's feces, which are happily eaten up by another snail to complete the whole bizarre life cycle. Story 25. The now extinct short-faced bear always fascinated me. I believe it is the largest known mammalian carnivore, land-dwelling, that ever existed. It's like an upsized grizzly, but with proportionally longer legs, which means it could run at high speed and long distances to catch a meal. It wasn't just a sprinter, it went the distance. When standing, a large individual could approach 12 feet, compared to the grizzly's 8-foot standing height. Story 26. You've heard of the headless horseman of Sleepy Hollow? Well, the idea of the horseman is thought to be based on the Irish fairy, the Dullahan. The Dullahan, like the horseman, is a headless rider who more often than not is seen as carrying his own head as he rides off. But, unlike Sleepy Hollow's horseman, he doesn't bring death but warns of it. He is a harbinger spirit, much like the banshee. When you see him, disaster soon follows. Then there is the church grim, a fairy that takes the shape of a great black hound. It has one job, and that is to guard graveyards. The origins of this creature are a little murky. In some legends, particularly those in England, a church grim is created by human hands rather than being born. When a graveyard for a church is being made, the priest would sacrifice a dog and bury it in the graveyard before anything else. The spirit of the dog becomes a fairy and the guardian of the graveyard. In other legends, a church grim is a captured fairy dog. There are quite a few throughout British and Irish myths that is bound once again by a priest to a graveyard to be its guardian. The creature is benign for all accounts unless you plan to rob the graves it looks over. After that, all bets are off. They have been recorded as being vicious and even deadly toward grave robbers. So keep grave robbing off of your bucket list unless you want to tangle with one. Story 27. Skinwalkers. According to Native American belief, they are men who make deals with evil spirits in order to become a shapeshifter. They then seek out and hunt humans. They do this by trying to lure you away from safety. They will mimic anything or anyone in order to fool you, even people you know. They are not like other cryptids who hide in the dark. They can hunt even in broad daylight. A common trick for them is to hide somewhere out of view and then attempt to call you over to them, using a familiar voice, saying something along the lines of, "Hey, come over here. It's me," or "Help me, please." The big kicker is that while they sound like someone you know, there will always be something off about it. Listen to your gut. As they are shapeshifters, they can appear to be any animal, but seemingly have a preference for ungulates, creatures like deer or elk. Rumor has it that if you have any native blood in you, just the mere mention of its name can attract it. Story 28. Okay, this is a fun one because it's not technically a mythical creature, but it has been so readily and deeply adopted into Mexican lore, it may as well have been an Aztec myth. Alebrillas. They were invented in the mid-1930s by a man named Pedro Linares. One day, he got sick and got a pretty bad fever, and in his fever dreams, he saw a bunch of weird, brightly colored creatures in a forest, all of them chanting the word alebrije. When Linares got better, he started making the creatures he'd seen out of paper mache. If you look up alebrijes, they're usually a mashup of various animals with patterns drawn on their skin and painted bright colors, usually orange, neon blue, green, and yellow. They'll be fish with a snake's head and lion's legs and a human torso, that kind of thing. Here's the fun part. They became as closely linked with traditional Mexican culture as piñata or Dia de Muertos. They were adopted, and before long, they became almost a mythical race in Mexican lore, to the point that Pixar itself added them in their movie Coco as a guardian of the afterlife type of creature in the land of the dead, which is 100% bullcrap. They came from some dude's fever-addled hallucinations. But there you go. Nowadays, alebrijes are an icon of Mexican culture and iconography. And while technically not a mythical creature in origin, they may as well be one now.